Elena Moore watched the condensation on the crystal glass for 8 seconds too long. And in those 8 seconds, she knew someone at table 1 was about to die. The heavy tumbler sat in front of Luca Romano like an offering. Amber liquid caught the low lighting of the onyx as ice shifted against the sides with a sound too soft for anyone else to hear. Every other glass of scotch had been poured by Marcus at the bar. This one appeared while she'd gone to refresh the bread basket. Someone who wasn't on staff had placed it there. Someone who knew exactly where the boss would sit. Someone who wanted him gone tonight. Elena was about to step into a game where one wrong breath meant a bullet. If you're strapped in for this high-stakes game of chemistry and crime, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss how this calculation ends. She kept her expression neutral as she approached with the bottle of vintage Macallan. 3 years of undergraduate forensic chemistry had taught her that survival meant observing everything while revealing nothing. The upscale lounge hummed with muted conversation and the clink of expensive glassware. Smooth jazz filtered through hidden speakers. Most people saw sophistication. Elena saw a laboratory about to become a crime scene. Luca Romano sat at the center of the curved leather booth like a king surveying his empire. His tailored black shirt was rolled to the elbows, exposing tattoos that crawled from wrist to throat, a visual history of violence that society magazines would never photograph. He nodded at something Lorenzo said, his expression relaxed and confident. He felt untouchable here. He came every Thursday, always the same booth, always surrounded by the same loyal faces. That false sense of security would get him killed if she didn't move fast. Elena had been working at the Onyx for 6 months. She'd chosen the job specifically because it was busy enough to stay invisible, but exclusive enough that patrons never really looked at the staff. She carried trays, memorized drink orders, and deposited her tips into her mother's medical fund. Nobody asked about her unfinished degree. Nobody looked too close. That was exactly what she needed after walking away from a promising career to pay off her family's crushing debts. But forensic instincts don't disappear. They just wait. She'd spotted the first warning sign when Luca's usual server called in sick that afternoon. The replacement looked professional enough, but he'd been too eager to handle table 1 personally. Then there was the matter of the glass itself, placed at a slightly different angle than the Onyx's precise service standards demanded, condensation pattern all wrong for something poured minutes ago. The second red flag was the ice. As Elena moved closer with the scotch bottle, angling herself for a routine check on whether anyone needed refills, she saw it. The faint oily sheen on the surface of the liquid. The way the ice cubes had a barely perceptible cloudiness at their core, not the crystal clarity of the restaurant's filtered water. She'd written a research paper on tasteless cardiotoxins sophomore year. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The poison would stop his heart in 15 minutes. Slow enough that he'd make it outside. Fast enough that no hospital could save him. Lorenzo leaned in to whisper something in Luca's ear, his hand resting on the boss's shoulder with practiced familiarity. The loyal right hand. The trusted brother. The man who'd just orchestrated the perfect inside job. Elena did the math in her head. She could turn around, finish her shift, and be free of the Romano shadow forever. Let the underworld solve its own problems. She was nobody, just a waitress trying to survive in a city that didn't care about people like her. Luca's hand moved toward the glass. The choice crystallized in that instant. This wasn't about loyalty to a crime lord or some misguided sense of heroism. This was about whether she could watch a man die when she had the knowledge to prevent it. Whether she could stay silent and still call herself the scientist who'd once sworn to use her skills to save lives, not ignore their ending. With a sharp breath and steady hands, Elena moved forward. "So sorry, Mr. Romano," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of nervous apology. She stepped closer to pour refills, her hip deliberately catching the edge of the table. The tray in her other hand tilted. Water glasses wobbled. Lorenzo jerked back to avoid the spill. In the 4 seconds of controlled chaos that followed, water spreading across white linen, Lorenzo standing to protect his suit, Luca's attention diverted to the commotion. Elena performed a sleight of hand that would alter the balance of power in the entire city. She switched the glasses. The poison tumbler slid in front of Lorenzo as she apologized profusely, dabbing at the spill with her towel. The clean glass settled in front of Luca. Both men were too focused on the disturbance to notice which crystal sat where. "Terribly sorry," Elena murmured again, her pulse thundering in her ears while her hands remained surgeon-steady. "I'll bring fresh napkins immediately." She stepped back, watching through her peripheral vision as Lorenzo, annoyed, impatient to resume his performance of loyalty, reached for the nearest glass to steady his nerves. He drank. Elena turned toward the kitchen, her legs moving on autopilot. Behind her, she heard the first cough. Then the sound of crystal hitting the floor. Then shouting. She didn't look back. She'd just saved a monster's life and signed her own death warrant in the process. Because men like Luca Romano didn't believe in coincidences. And he would come looking for answers. The only question was whether he'd come to thank her or bury her. Elena just signed her own death warrant to save a man she doesn't even like. "I want to hear from you. Would you have switched the glasses or walked away? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from while we see if she makes it out of this alley." Elena's hand trembled as she lifted the water pitcher, but only because she willed it to. The trick to a convincing accident was committing fully to the performance. She approached table 1 with her eyes slightly downcast, the posture of someone who'd spent 6 months perfecting invisibility. "Gentlemen, may I refresh your water?" Her voice carried the practiced deference of staff who knew their place. Luca waved a dismissive hand, still mid-conversation with the man across from him. Lorenzo didn't even glance up. "Perfect." She reached across the table, angling the pitcher toward the far glasses. Her hip caught the table edge, not hard enough to raise suspicion, but enough to send vibrations through the polished wood. The water pitcher tilted. Crystal wobbled. Lorenzo's eyes snapped up just as cold water splashed across the white linen, spreading toward his expensive suit. Christ. He lurched backward, hands shooting up to protect his jacket. The chair scraped. Other men at nearby tables turned to look. In the half-second of chaos, Elena's free hand moved with surgical precision. The poisoned glass slid 3 inches to the right. The clean glass took its place in front of Luca. Her towel was already out, dabbing frantically at the spreading water. I'm so sorry," she stammered, her face flushed with manufactured mortification. She kept her body between the glasses and Luca's line of sight, using the towel to create motion that drew the eye. "I'll get fresh linens immediately." Just Lorenzo snapped, brushing water off his sleeve. His face was red, veins visible at his temples. He grabbed the nearest glass, his own death sentence, and downed half of it in 2 angry swallows. "Watch what you're doing." "Of course, sir." "I apologize." Elena stepped back, pulse hammering. The glass was in his hand. The toxin was in his system. There was no reversing it now. She turned toward the kitchen, forcing herself to walk at a normal pace. Behind her, conversations resumed. Someone laughed. The jazz music continued its lazy melody. For 15 seconds, the world was perfectly ordinary. Then Lorenzo coughed. It was a small sound at first, almost polite. Then it came again, harsher. Elena heard his chair scrape as he stood. Another cough, wet and desperate. Someone asked if he was all right. The glass hit the floor with a crystal scream. Elena pushed through the kitchen doors just as the shouting started. Through the circular window, she watched Lorenzo collapse against the booth, his face gray, hands clutching his chest. Luca was on his feet, barking orders. Men surrounded Lorenzo's convulsing body. The entire restaurant erupted into controlled panic. She'd done it. She'd saved the monster and killed the traitor. Now she had to survive what came next. Elena made it halfway through the alley behind the onyx before the shadows moved. 2 men materialized from the darkness near the dumpsters, blocking her path to the street. She recognized them from Table 1, the silent enforcers who'd watched Lorenzo die without lifting a finger to help. Behind her, footsteps echoed off brick. She was boxed in. "Ms. Moore." The voice came from her left. A third man emerged from a service doorway, phone pressed to his ear. "Mr. Romano would like a word." She could run. Her apartment was 4 blocks away. She knew these streets better than they did. But runners looked guilty, and guilty people ended up in the river. So Elena adjusted her purse strap and met his eyes with the same blank expression she'd perfected for rude customers. "My shift just ended. I need to catch the bus. This won't take long." It wasn't a request. They walked her to a black sedan idling at the alley's mouth. The back door opened. Elena climbed in, her mind already calculating. If Luca suspected her involvement, she'd be dead already. This was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or verification. The drive lasted 7 minutes. They brought her to a brownstone in a neighborhood where streetlights worked and doormen asked questions. The parlor she was led into smelled like leather and old money. Luca Romano stood by the fireplace, scotch in hand, his tattooed throat casting shadows in the amber light. His men positioned themselves at the exits. Luca studied her for a long moment, his gaze sharp enough to dissect. "Lorenzo was my brother for 15 years. His voice was quiet, controlled. Dangerous. I'd like to know why you killed him." Elena's pulse remained steady. She'd expected this. "I didn't kill anyone. I spilled water. You switched the glasses. You're mistaken." Luca moved closer, each step deliberate. Most people would be trembling. Elena kept her hands relaxed at her sides, her breathing even. Fear was a chemical reaction. She could control chemical reactions. "I watched the security footage 3 times, he continued. Your hand moved. Left glass, right glass. Smooth. Professional. So either you're very lucky or you knew exactly what you were doing." He stopped 2 feet away. "Which is it, Miss Moore?" She held his stare. His eyes were dark brown, almost black, with the kind of intelligence that came from surviving in a world where mistakes meant death. He wasn't angry. He was fascinated. "I saw something in the ice," she said finally. "An oily sheen. Cloudiness. It looked wrong." "Wrong how?" "Like someone put a lipophilic cardiotoxin in your drink. Probably palotoxin derivative. Colorless, tasteless, stops the heart in 15 minutes. She tilted her head. "I studied forensic chemistry before I became a waitress. Pattern recognition is hard to turn off." Silence filled the room. Luca's men exchanged glances. Their boss continued to stare at her, something shifting behind his expression. Not gratitude. Not suspicion. Something closer to recognition. "You saved my life," he said slowly. "And you're not afraid of me. Should I be?" Elena's voice stayed level. "You haven't given me a reason yet." Luca gestured to one of his men, who produced a small evidence bag from his jacket. Inside was one of the ice cubes from Lorenzo's glass, partially melted but preserved. He set it on the mahogany table between them. "Show me," Luca said. Elena moved closer, studying the cube under the lamplight. The cloudiness had settled at the bottom, barely visible now. She pulled a pen from her purse and used it to tilt the bag, watching how the light refracted through the ice. "Palotoxin works by disrupting sodium-potassium ion channels in cell membranes," she said, her voice falling into the clinical cadence of a lecture hall. "It's one of the most toxic non-protein substances known. A few micrograms is lethal. The problem is it's almost impossible to obtain unless you have access to specific marine research facilities or chemical suppliers with very particular licensing. Get to the point. The point is that whoever did this didn't just want you dead. They wanted it to look natural. Heart attack, maybe a stroke. No trace in a standard autopsy unless someone specifically tests for exotic toxins." Elena looked up from the ice. "But there's a flaw in their plan." Luca's expression sharpened. "What flaw?" "Palotoxin is water-soluble but unstable at room temperature. It degrades rapidly. To work as intended, it needed to be frozen into the ice itself, which means whoever made these cubes had to prepare them hours in advance. She paused, letting the implication settle. Where does the onyx get its ice? The bar has its own machine. And where did Lorenzo get his ice? Understanding flickered across Luca's face. His jaw tightened. My private stock. I bring my own filtered ice for the scotch. I'm particular about dilution. Which is stored where? My office. Behind the restaurant. His voice went cold. Only 5 people have access to that freezer. Elena watched him process the arithmetic of betrayal. Lorenzo hadn't acted alone. Someone had prepared the poisoned ice cubes and placed them in Luca's private reserve, knowing his routine, knowing his preferences. It was intimate knowledge. Family knowledge. Your brother didn't plan this by himself, she said quietly. He needed someone who understood your habits well enough to weaponize them. Someone you trusted enough to let into your private space. Luca's hand curled into a fist on the table. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His men shifted, reading the danger in their boss's silence. Names, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're going to help me find every name attached to this. Every person who thought they could put poison in my house. Elena met his eyes. She'd crossed a line the moment she switched those glasses. There was no going back to invisibility now. She'd become part of his world whether she wanted to or not. Then you'll need to give me access to your operations, she said. All of them. Because whoever planned this is still inside your organization, and they're smart enough to try again. Luca opened a drawer in the mahogany desk and withdrew a leather portfolio. Inside were stacks of bills, crisp hundreds bound with paper bands. He set it on the table between them, the gesture casual, as if money solved everything in his world. 50,000, he said. For saving my life. For your discretion. For whatever comes next. Elena stared at the portfolio without touching it. 50,000 would erase her mother's medical debt. Would let her finish her degree. Would buy her freedom from the suffocating weight of bills that had crushed her future into a waitress uniform. It sat there like salvation wrapped in leather. She pushed it back across the table. I don't want your money. Luca's expression flickered with something between confusion and irritation. People didn't refuse him. That wasn't how his world worked. Everyone wants money, Ms. Moore. Name a different price. There isn't one. Then what do you want? Protection? A job? I can make problems disappear. Your money bought that poison. Elena's voice cut through his offer, sharp and precise as a scalpel. Your empire, your violence, your blood money, that's what paid for the toxin that almost stopped your heart. You built a world where betrayal is currency and loyalty has a price tag, and now you're surprised when someone cashes in. The room went silent. Luca's men tensed, hands drifting toward concealed weapons. No one spoke to their boss like that. No one survived speaking to their boss like that. But Luca raised a hand, stopping them. He leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with renewed intensity. Not anger. Something closer to respect. You think I'm the villain in this story, he said quietly. I think you're a man who mistakes fear for loyalty and power for safety. Elena stood, her composure intact despite the armed men surrounding her. I didn't save you because I approve of what you do. I saved you because I couldn't watch someone die when I had the knowledge to prevent it. But don't mistake that choice for allegiance. Then why agree to help find the traitors? Because your organization is a cancer, Mr. Romano. And cancer spreads. Whoever planned this won't stop with you. They'll burn down half the city to take your throne, and people like my mother, people who have nothing to do with your world, will end up as collateral damage. She met his eyes. I'm not helping you. I'm helping everyone you'll hurt if you die. Luca was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. It wasn't warm, but it was genuine. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, or the most foolish. Maybe both. Elena picked up her purse. But I'm not for sale. Remember that. She walked toward the door. This time, no one stopped her. The chemical supplier's records arrived at 2 in the morning. Elena sat in Luca's office, surrounded by ledgers and shipping manifests, her forensic training converting numbers into narratives. Luca stood by the window, smoke curling from his cigarette, watching her work. Here. She tapped a series of transactions highlighted in yellow. 3 orders of palotoxin precursors over 6 months. Small quantities, staggered timing. Shipped to a research facility that doesn't exist. Address? A warehouse in Red Hook. Registered to a shell company. She cross-referenced another document. The same company that handles waste disposal for your restaurants. Luca's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone, made a call. Bring me Vincent. Now. 20 minutes later, his waste management contractor sat in the chair across from Elena, sweat beading on his forehead. Luca didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Vincent talked. The operation unfolded like a dissection. Elena traced financial threads while Luca applied pressure to the people attached to them. The accountant who'd buried the shell company in legitimate paperwork. The dock supervisor who'd signed for shipments that never appeared on official logs. The sous chef who'd replaced Luca's filtered ice with poison cubes, thinking his boss would never notice the difference. Each confession led to another name. Another thread. Elena's stomach turned as the scope became clear. This wasn't Lorenzo's plan. He'd been the weapon, not the architect. Marco. Luca said the name like a curse. His own cousin. The man who'd stood beside him for 20 years. He's been skimming from the Northern Territories for 8 months. Elena found the proof in offshore account transfers, the pattern unmistakable to anyone who understood money laundering. Marco had been building his own empire inside Luca's, piece by stolen piece. Lorenzo's death was supposed to be the opening move in a takeover. Where is he? Luca's voice was ice. His estate. North of the city. One of his men checked his phone. Our people say he's packing. Probably knows we're coming. Luca moved toward the door, his men falling in behind him. Elena remained seated, her hands trembling now that the intellectual work was done. She'd just helped orchestrate a purge. Whatever happened next would be her responsibility too. Ms. Moore. Luca paused at the threshold. Stay here. What comes next isn't something you need to witness. I already know what comes next. Her voice was quiet. You're going to kill him. He tried to kill me. He poisoned my house. He turned my brother into a traitor. Luca's expression was unreadable. What would you have me do? Elena had no answer. In his world, mercy was weakness. Justice meant elimination. She'd known this when she agreed to help, but theory was different from consequence. Just make it quick, she said finally, hating herself for the concession. Luca nodded once and disappeared into the night, leaving Elena alone with ledgers that detailed the price of betrayal in both dollars and lives. Elena left her uniform folded on the manager's desk at the Onyx with a note that said only effective immediately. She didn't wait for questions. She'd already packed her apartment the night before, 2 suitcases, her laptop, her mother's medical files. Everything that mattered fit in the trunk of her 15-year-old Honda. The bus station smelled like diesel and desperation. She bought a ticket to Providence under a name that wasn't hers, paid in cash, and watched the city shrink in the rear window. Luca Romano had her address, her phone number, her social security number. If he wanted to find her, he would. This wasn't about hiding. It was about testing whether he understood the word no. She found a sublet near Brown University, a studio above a bookstore where the landlord didn't ask questions. Days blurred into routine. Morning coffee at a cafe where no one knew her name. Afternoons in the university library, pretending to research a degree she'd never finish. Evenings cooking alone, listening for footsteps in the hall that never came. Her phone stayed off for the first week. When she finally powered it on, there were 17 missed calls from the Onyx's manager, 3 from her former roommate, and none from Luca. No texts. No messages. Just silence. She told herself that silence was respect. But part of her, The part she didn't want to examine felt something uncomfortably close to disappointment. Week 2 brought a letter to her mother's hospital, forwarded through Elena's old address. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 made out to the medical center's billing department. No note, no signature, just the payment she'd refused, applied exactly where it would do the most good while removing her ability to send it back. Elena stood in her kitchenette holding the copy her mother had sent, her hands shaking with fury and something else she couldn't name. He'd circumvented her principles while honoring her intent. It was infuriating. It was thoughtful. It was exactly the kind of move someone who understood power would make. By week 3, she'd stopped jumping at shadows. The city felt safe again, or as safe as any city could feel. She found a job at a coffee shop, started attending chemistry seminars as an auditor. Life rebuilt itself in smaller, quieter pieces. Week 4 arrived with frost on the windows and the recognition that Luca Romano had given her exactly what she'd demanded. Space. Autonomy. The freedom to choose her own path without his world bleeding into hers. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt unfinished. Like an equation missing its final variable. Like a story interrupted mid-sentence. On the last day of the month, Elena bought a return ticket to the city. Not because she had to. Because she wanted to know if the man who'd respected her boundaries would accept her crossing them again. Elena found him in the library cafe on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting at a corner table with a paperback and an untouched espresso. No bodyguards flanking the exits. No tailored suit that cost more than rent. Just dark jeans, a gray sweater, and reading glasses that made him look like any other graduate student avoiding a thesis deadline. She almost didn't recognize him without the armor of his world. He looked up when she approached, no surprise in his expression. He'd known she'd come back. Maybe he'd been waiting all along. Ms. Moore. He closed the book, Camus, she noticed, and gestured to the empty chair. I was hoping you'd find this place. You knew I was back. I knew you'd left. I didn't look for where you went. He removed his glasses, folded them carefully. That was the agreement, wasn't it? Boundaries. Elena sat, her coffee cooling between her hands. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. Students hunched over laptops. A professor graded papers. It was aggressively, beautifully normal. My mother's debt is paid, she said finally. Good. I didn't want your money. I know. Luca's voice held no triumph, no satisfaction. But you wanted your mother healthy. Sometimes we accept help even when our pride says no. She studied his face, searching for the dangerous man from the brownstone. He was still there, in the awareness of his surroundings, the controlled stillness of his posture. But something had shifted. The edges were softer. More human. Marco, she asked, though she already knew the answer. Gone. The organization has been restructured. Less violence, more legitimate enterprise. He paused. You were right. Fear isn't loyalty. It's just delayed betrayal. And you came here to tell me that? I came here to ask if you'd have coffee with me. Luca's expression held something vulnerable, almost uncertain. Not as someone you saved. Not as someone who owes you. Just as someone who'd like to know the woman who sees poison in ice cubes and refuses $50,000. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness, he hadn't earned that. But possibility. The recognition that people contain multitudes, that monsters could choose to be men, that chemistry wasn't the only science of transformation. Elena proved that you don't need a gun to take down an empire, just the right formula. If you want more stories of brilliant minds outsmarting the darkness, make sure you're subscribed so you're here for the next one. Just coffee, she said. Nothing to do with your world. Nothing to do with my world, he agreed. Tell me about forensic chemistry. Tell me why you walked away from it. Tell me something real. So she did. And for the first time since the night she switched those glasses, Elena Moore talked to Luca Romano as if he were simply a person sitting across from her in a cafe where the coffee was mediocre and the future was uncertain, and the afternoon light made everything feel like a beginning rather than an end. They talked until the library closed.